Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about maximizing happiness. That sounds awesome, doesn't it? To make sure that the maximum number of people could live the happiest lives ever possible? That would be great. This is the goal that a philosophy called utilitarianism set for themselves. This philosophy has been around for a while, so it comes in different flavors, and there have been many different interpretations of it. But let me show you what question we're going to discuss in relation with it today. So we're interested in whether our moral actions should be guided by the goal of maximizing happiness. And before we actually discuss what a utilitarian take on morality could be, I would like you to have a look at this little picture. So this is the famous thought experiment called the Trolley Problem. It was originally introduced around 60 or 70 years ago and has developed a life of its own ever since. Anyway, in its original version, we had a trolley driver with a brake problem who was faced with a decision to continue straight and kill the 5 workers down the track, or to turn left and save the 5 workers, but kill an innocent pedestrian crossing the other track. The classical version that more people are familiar with involves a bystander. Imagine this is you standing over there next to a switch. So you're standing next to the switch and you observe the same situation, and oncoming trolley is about to run over the 5 people working on the track. And you have a choice. You can do nothing and watch those workers die, or you could flip the switch and save them, but you will end up effectively killing the 1 person that is on the other track. What would you do? Hold that thought. Now, let's play around with this situation a little bit more. Now, you don't have the switch anymore. Imagine that you're standing on a footbridge. Yes, this is you. And you observe the same situation. The trolley is about to hit the 5 workers. And no, you can't shout to them, they're too far. And in some versions, they're actually tied to the track. So you can do nothing to remove them from those tracks. However, you're thinking to yourself, if only I had something heavy to throw off the bridge, and that thing would block the movement of the trolley, or maybe give the workers time to get off the tracks. Luckily, or maybe unluckily, there is a very large person standing next to you. And technically, you could push off that guy, push him off the bridge, and he would fall. And yes, he's very large, so he would stop the movement of the trolley with his body. Would you do that? Tricky, right? Well, let's see what other people said they would do. Now, the trolley problem has been the subject of many surveys in which about 80 to 90% of respondents have chosen to kill the 1 and save the 5 when they had the switch option. When the researchers changed the scenario and introduced the footbridge, only 51% of the participants said they were ready to push that large person to save the 5 people on the tracks. So if you were hesitant to do that, you're not alone. Finally, like I said, this problem has quite a life of its own, and there are all kinds of different variations. So we could imagine that this 1 person on the other track is somebody you know, like your mother or your child or your pregnant girlfriend. Would you still be willing to flip the switch? Unsurprisingly, if the 1 person to be hypothetically killed was their loved one, people were much less likely to divert the moving trolley, letting it run over the 5 workers. Now, this is an interesting problem from an ethical point of view. What would be the morally right thing to do? And utilitarianism is a philosophy that can help us solve this problem. Classic utilitarianism, as you can see, is often summarized in the slogan that an act is right if and only if it causes the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. However, this principle of utility would not allow the kind of sacrifice of the smaller number to the greater number of people unless the net good overall is increased more than any other alternative. So somehow we would have to quantify the happiness that the many would achieve and compare it to the amount of the unhappiness experienced by the few. And only if the amount of happiness outweighs the amount of unhappiness, only then the action would be justified. But, well, if we go back to this problem, it seems easy, right? You have 5 people who will be happy to be alive with all their family members versus one dead guy. Well, he's not going to be happy and his family is not going to be happy, but there's just one person versus 5. So it seems that we have a solution, right? The many versus the few. Another way to talk about utilitarianism would be to say that it's a combination of 2 other kinds of philosophy, which is consequentialism and hedonism. Lots of ism words, I know. So, well, consequentialism is what it sounds like. It's about consequences. Act consequentialism claims that to determine the right action and some set of feasible actions, we should directly evaluate the consequences of the actions to see which has the best consequences. Thus, to quote Mr. Moore, an act is morally right if and only if that act maximizes the good, that is, if and only if the total amount of good for all minus the total amount of bad for all is greater than this net amount for any incompatible act available to the agent on that occasion. So it's, again, it's some kind of a maths equation, right? And then hedonism, in its turn, claims that pleasure is the only intrinsic good and that pain is the only intrinsic bad. So for utilitarians, we should do everything to achieve more pleasure or happiness, the way they call it, for the great number of people. And we could have a whole lecture or course about what pleasure is or what happiness is, but we won't do that. For now, let's just think of it as a well-being of the maximum number of people. So to put it in simple English language, we could talk about the 4 elements or axioms of utilitarianism. The first one is that pleasure or happiness is the only thing that has intrinsic value. The second one is that actions are morally right if they promote happiness and wrong if they promote unhappiness. But sometimes they do both. So the good consequences of an action are only justified if the net sum of the overall happiness in the world outweighs the unhappiness of the few people resulting from that action. Last but not least, something that we haven't touched upon directly is that everyone's happiness counts equally. Now let's go back to the trolley problem here. So imagine once again that the one person on the tracks is somebody you know and love. For a utilitarian, your choice should not be influenced by whether you know this person or not, because your happiness and your loved one's happiness is equal to every single one of these workers. So it's still 1 or 2 versus 5, and you should still choose the happiness of the more people in favor of the fewer. Well, I guess they have a solution for us. However, let me present you with this little problem. Now, you're a doctor and 5 of your patients are in need of transplants. A healthy patient comes in for a routine checkup. Well, you know where I'm going with that, right? You have 5 people who are going to die, and you have a healthy person who you can sacrifice. Now, do you flip the switch? Yeah, it doesn't really sit right with most of you, right? You're probably shaking your heads vigorously at the moment. But it sounds like the same problem, right? You have 5 people who are about to die and 1 person who could save them by being sacrificed. Well, I guess one possible explanation of that is that it has something to do with the Kantian idea that we cannot use people as means, right? In the case of the fat man earlier, and in the case of the unsuspecting patient, we seem to be using them as means to stop the trolley or save the patients. And that doesn't really feel correct, morally right to us. And to be honest, I would say that classical utilitarians would agree with us on that, because although act utilitarianism as such assesses only actions in terms of rightness, it nevertheless also recognizes the importance of familiar moral rules. So rules like don't lie, don't kill, are regarded as useful decision procedures. That is, guidelines that we should almost always follow, but not as standards of moral rightness. It's all good and well, you might think, but so far we've been talking about thought experiments, hypothetical trolleys killing off hypothetical railway workers and whatnot. What's the point? Well, the proponents of this theory see lots of practical applications for their philosophy in the real world. Let's take politics. As we know, utilitarianism implies that we should look for effective interventions to help others, regardless of their nationality, where they live, or where they come from, right? Remember, everyone's happiness is equally important. On this basis, global health and development may be considered a particularly high priority cause for utilitarians. For instance, for most of human history, it was the norm that around 2 out of 5 children died before their 5th birthday, largely due to now preventable causes. With improved sanitation and access to medical care, we have since made tremendous progress against child mortality, with global rates dropping to around 5%, which is 5 out of 100, right? As you have probably figured out by now, utilitarianism is a form of altruism, where everybody should strive for more happiness for more people, wherever and whoever they may be. So we can talk about international politics or things close to home, like free healthcare for all, or the implementation of a basic universal income, right? Because happy people are healthy people. Another point of implementation, which is quite important these days, is farm animal welfare. To quote Jeremy Bentham, one of the founders of utilitarianism, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And I hope we all agree that animals do suffer. To continue this quote, why should the law refuse its protection to any sensitive being? The time will come when humanity will extend its mantle over everything which breathes. So improving the welfare of farmed animals should be a high moral priority for utilitarians. The argument for this conclusion is simple. First, animals matter morally. Second, humans cause a huge amount of unnecessary suffering to animals in factory farms. Third, there are easy ways to reduce the number of farmed animals and the severity of their suffering. Remember, everybody's happiness matters equally. Finally, classical utilitarianism, to quote Derek Parfit, another utilitarian, classical utilitarians would claim that the destruction of mankind would be by far the greatest of all conceivable crimes. The badness of this crime would lie in the vast reduction of the possible sum of happiness. Sure, if everybody dies, there are no more happy people anymore, right? So utilitarians are guided by long-term goals, according to which the most important determinant of the value of our actions today is how those actions affect the very long-term future. Strong long-termism follows from utilitarianism. If we assume that some of our actions can meaningfully affect the long-run future, and that we can estimate which effects are positive and which are negative in the long run. Thus, such policies as resolving the issue of the climate change and turning to green energy, as well as avoiding the Third World War, are among the most important utilitarian tasks on the global scale. Another application of this policy, of this philosophy, could be in business ethics. One example of utilitarianism in business is the practice of having tiered pricing for a product or service to different types of customers. For example, the airline industry offers first class, business class, and economy class seats on many of their airlines. Customers who fly in first or business class pay a much higher rate than those in economy seats, but they also get more amenities. However, the higher prices paid for business or first class seats help to ease the airline's financial burden created by making room for economy class seats. This would be an example of utilitarianism. Another example of act utilitarianism is a pharmaceutical company releasing a drug that has been governmentally approved with known side effects, because the drug is able to help more people than the number of those who are going to be bothered by the minor side effects. Act utilitarianism often follows the end justifies the means mentality, but, well, the opponents of the theory would say that this is a slippery slope, right? Because if we admit that utilitarianism is useful for making decisions in politics and, let's say, pharmaceuticals, then imagine that we could torture a small group of little children, but by this torture, by this act of torture, we would be able to find the cure for cancer. Would that be justified, you think? Finally, what I would like to leave you with is the effects of utilitarianism on the AI development. You know, lots of people these days are already in the process of developing the self-conscious AI, and we don't have an AI that is fully conscious yet. But AI is already required to take decisions autonomously, right? There is an example of an AI that was accused of discriminating against women, hence was unethical, because it tended to give men larger credit sums, basing its decisions on what was done in the past. And we should understand that AI is a tool, neither ethical nor unethical. And basically, the decision it makes depend on who developed it and how it learned how to make those decisions. So it looks like there is a necessity to teach AI to take morally acceptable decisions. Before I let you go, I would like to give you a little home assignment. So let me share my screen with you. So what we're looking at is the Moral Machine project. The Moral Machine is a platform for gathering a human perspective on moral decisions made by machine intelligence, such as driving cars. So technically, by participating in this little project, in this little game, you would be teaching the self-driving machine AI how to make right or wrong moral decisions. Let me just show you a sample scenario here. So what we have a self-driving car, which has a brake failure, so it's not going to stop. And there are two options. The car can either go straight, remember our trolley problem, or the car could swerve and hit an obstacle. So let's read what's going to happen if it goes straight. In this case, the self-driving car with sudden brake failure will continue ahead and drive through a pedestrian crossing ahead. This will result in 1 injured criminal, in 2 dead, well, technically 3, because we have a pregnant woman and a baby here. And then we don't know what's going to happen with an elderly man and a female athlete. So all of those pedestrians are flouting the law by crossing on the red signal, though. Now, if we decide to save their lives and hit an obstacle, this is what's going to happen. The self-driving car is going to crash into a concrete barrier, and this will result in injuring 1 large man, a passenger. 1 female doctor is going to die, and we're not sure what's going to happen with 1 male executive, 1 girl, and 1 cat. So there's all kinds of scenarios where you kind of have to choose, and there are no good choices, seemingly. So what I would like you to do at home is to go to this website, moralmachine.net, play around, check out all those different scenarios. Don't forget to read the descriptions, and write a short paragraph about whether teaching AI to use the utilitarian approach could be a good idea or a bad idea to teach it some good moral decisions. Thank you for your attention.